We're going to carry on with our next presentation, which is from Antonio Olmos, who is a brilliant editorial and portrait photographer, and the project he's going to be talking about today is called The Landscape of Murder, and I'm going to let him do the rest of the talking.
Hello, hi, my name is Antonio Olmos. This project I'm going to show you is called The Landscape of Murder, and I photographed it all in London. Now, I'm an editorial photographer. I've been a photographer for 25 years. I'm from Mexico. I've lived in London a little bit under 20 years. And I've been very lucky as a photojournalist to travel around the world, see things. But as I've gotten older, I've been more and more interested in London. And I've never really photographed London until this project. So what prompted this project was basically, this is in Palmer's Green, or Southgate, depending on what part of the, if you're more impressed by Southgate, you say Southgate. If you're more impressed by Palmer's Green, you say Palmer's Green. But basically, this is North London, Enfield, and a woman named Jitka Naholidova was murdered by her boyfriend in January 1st, 2011. And I live a couple blocks from this house, and when she was murdered, one of my neighbors told me that a woman had been murdered nearby, a couple of blocks away. So I was very curious. I went to see it, and this house is almost an exact replica of my house. I have a garden in front of my house, but otherwise it's the exact same house. I mean, all the houses are the same. And I was, so I saw the house, and I was like, wow. So I turned on BBC London that night and hoping to see something about it, and there was nothing about it. And there was nothing in any of the newspapers or anything. And I was really intrigued that a woman could get murdered by her boyfriend, or anybody could get murdered and not make the news. So it sort of sparked an idea. So I casually started sort of paying attention to the news and sort of photographing all these places. So I went back and did this picture, and it's not a great picture, but it just illustrated the fact there's no police tape, there's nothing to say there's been a crime scene. And I kept following the story, and I did 210 photographs for the project, and I'm going to show you 80. But this is the second murder in London, and again, it was a woman who was murdered by her family. Basically, it was an Asian family. She disrespected her family for whatever reason. I think she wanted to get a divorce from her husband, so all the male members of her family killed her. And then they tried to burn the house down to cover up the facts. And I thought, wow, that's an amazing murder. Again, it didn't make the news. I was really intrigued. It did not make the news. It made a little bit of a paragraph in one of the local advertising rags, but it didn't make BBC London, it didn't make any of the national newspapers, ITV, Evening Standard, nothing. And I was very intrigued that 2 women have been murdered now, and still no news. And so I started going to all these places where murders happened, just sort of an idea was growing into my head, what's happening. So this is one of the, this is like the 5th murder. Basically, a Polish immigrant had been beaten to death by his roommate. And again, that didn't make the news, which I was also very intrigued by. So I realized that very few murders actually do make the news. So I kept sort of following these places, and a homeless man, 2 Russian men who lived, were squatting in a house. Again, a bar had a fight over, they were drunk and they had a fight, and one of them killed the other, and again, it didn't make the news. So I kept visiting these places, and it was only till black youths were involved in a murder that it was big news. And I was really impressed, I wouldn't say impressed, I was really kind of bothered by that, because this is in Walthamstow, and this is like 3 blocks away from the second murder in London in 2011, where a woman had been killed by her family. Just 2 blocks away, a young boy had been killed in a gang fight, and he was pushed in front of a bus by a rival gang. I'm not even saying he was in a gang. He was pushed in front of a bus by a gang, and the bus ran him over. The bus couldn't stop before it happened. And they did it on purpose. They knew what they were doing. And that made huge news. It was an Evening Standard. It made BBC London. And I was really intrigued by why, when black youths are involved, does it make the news? And I started realizing that one of the things that was happening was that certain newspapers in this country cover crime in a certain way to reinforce certain stereotypes. Now, in the process of my project, there was 210 murders in a 2-year period in London. 60 of them were domestic violence, men killing their partners, their wives, and almost none of them made the news. And there was 19 gang-related murders. They all made the news. So just to show you, when I'm a guy who loves newspapers. I worked in the media all my life, and so just to show you that basically, you have to really pay attention to what you read and what you're reading. And this is a criticism of the Evening Standard, all the right-wing tabloids, even some of this way people who I consider very good journalists, the BBC London, ITV News, London Today, they just don't cover certain things. So these are the pictures I made. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about my working practice. Basically, I decided that, to me, London was the M25. Everything within the M25, if a murder happened, I would go photograph the place where it happened. So basically, that's what I did. That was my first thing. The other thing I did, I started to work on a tripod. Now, I'm a photojournalist, so I travel very lightly. I work quickly. And on this project, I decided to carry a big camera and shoot everything on a tripod and make myself very visible. So every time there was a person in the picture, I would ask them permission if I could photograph. And the reason was because imagine you're going to the worst time in your life. A friend, a family member had been murdered. The last thing you expect is a photographer to come up and say, "Hi, can I take your picture?" And that's exactly what I was doing. So I had to explain myself, why I was doing it. And in the course of the project, only 2 people said no to me. I was very shocked by that. I thought people would say, get away from us. But I always explained myself, and people gave me permission. Now, a lot of these pictures don't have people in them, so I didn't have that problem. So, for example, this picture is a woman who was mentally ill, had a dispute with her neighbors. So the way she settled the dispute was by setting the apartment on fire where her neighbors lived. Now, the second biggest category of crime in London, after domestic violence, is for murder, is the mental health issues. A lot of people who shouldn't be in the community for whatever reason, schizophrenia, brain, things like even brain tumors could affect your mental stability. Basically, people shouldn't be in the community because of mental health issues. Were let out, and then they committed a crime. One example is a woman who killed her mother in 2005, and she was let out after 6 years, and the first thing she did was kill a member of the public. So, and this is one of the few. I don't know. The other thing I wanted to say is that most crimes, regardless of the cause of them, are solved within a day. And this is a picture from a place called Penge East in South London, where a young Portuguese boy, a student, was stabbed after he left a corner shop, and somebody stole his wallet, and they never solved the crime. It's still unsolved today. So his family left out this little memorial saying, "Give yourself up, coward." So I'm not going to explain every picture, but you get the sense of what I'm trying to do here. This one is in northeast London in a place called Loughton. And one of the things about my project was I sort of expected to be in central London a lot, but in fact, most of the murders I did were at the edges of London because for whatever reason, social problems were being pushed out. The thing is, all the suburbs in London were built for the rich and the upper middle classes. And in 100 years, it's flipped. Now, most people want to live in central London. So what used to be the inner city is now the outer city. So all the social deprivation, all the housing issues, most of it, inequality in London is residing more and more in the edges of London. There's been whole estates in like Bermondsey, for example, that have been knocked down to build, luxury flats, and people get rehoused in Croydon, for example. So anyway, this is Loughton. This is at the edge of London, and 2 taxi drivers who were best friends for 40 years had a fight. One of them killed the other, and the friend decided to dismember his friend's body and threw it in the lake. And he buried the head somewhere. And when he was caught within a day, the judge asked him, "Where's the head?" And he refused. "I refuse to tell you where the head is." And it was a dispute over like 20 quid. So. This is a domestic violence, a young boy who killed his girlfriend. And this is you guys all know about Mark Dugan and what happened when he was shot by the police. Well, one of the reasons Mark Dugan was on the police's radar was because his friend, his cousin, was killed at this nightclub in Mile End called Bohem. And these 2 rival organizations who I don't know. I don't really like to make these judgments because somebody could be in a gang, but they could just be friends with gang members. There's different shades of whatever. But two rival organizations found each other. This club had a huge fight. One of them stabbed the other, and one of the people that died was Mark Dugan's cousin. Now, nobody would talk to the police about the crime, and they arrested 20 people for this murder, and nobody would talk, and nobody was convicted of the murder. But Mark Dugan was one of the people that was questioned, and the police started following Mark Dugan, partly because of his, things he'd done in the past, but also because they knew that he knew the murderer, and the police thought probably that Mark Dugan would take revenge for this murder. So that's why he was being followed a lot. He was being followed for other reasons, but one of the reasons he started being followed by the police was because of this murder. So this murder had never happened. Maybe the London riots would have never happened. And this picture you see here is in Edmonton, not too far from where I live in Palmer's Green, Southgate, what do you want to call it. And this was one of the few gang violent. Basically, a young boy was chased by a rival gang, and they tried to steal his phone and his young brother's phone. They caught the boy who was murdered. They caught his brother, and while he was defending his younger brother, he got beaten to death, and he died on the spot. And he died at the spot where all his friends are. And one of the reasons I love this picture is because when I showed up at the scene, at the end of the street there was all these news paparazzi guys with huge long lenses. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "There's a gang over there, and the gang, they're going to beat us up if we go over there and photograph them." So I don't have long lenses, so I was going, well, I have to go over there and photograph them. So I went up to them and said, "Can I take your picture?" And I explained to them why I was doing it, and the kids were like a bit perplexed. They never really met a photographer or a photojournalist, and but they trusted me, and they said, "Okay, you can take a picture." So I walked across the street and hung out there for half an hour while they mourned their friend, and I left. But the reason I love this picture so much is because they're still teenagers, and they're still texting, they're still ambivalent, there's this social awkwardness and stuff, and for some people, the way these kids dress is a social signifier that they're somehow gang members or violent. But mostly all these kids are kids of color, and a lot of people, including people who work in my profession, are afraid of teenagers, and are afraid of teenagers of color, and are afraid. You're just afraid. They don't know how to talk to kids like this, And of course, I'm lucky. I'm a brown kid, I'm not a brown kid anymore. I'm a 50-year-old brown kid. But basically, I know what it's like to be looked at a certain way, When I first came to Europe, I would go to France or Spain, and before people would look at me, and I could see there in their face, they could say, "That guy's an Arab, and I better watch him." And then 2 seconds later, they figure out I was Mexican. They go, "Oh, I love Mexico. I love Acapulco. I've been there. I've been to Cancun and stuff." But I can see how people judge you by just the look, the way you look, the color of your skin. Anyway, so this is my favorite picture of the whole scene, So, anyway. Oh, by the way, you can ask questions. You can interrupt me. You can tell me what So. Yeah, go ahead.
If these were reported, how did you find out about them?
Well, it took me a while to figure it out. Basically, the Metropolitan Police has a website which they tell you everything they're doing, and nobody looks at it. It's incredible. It's a huge website, and it tells you everything they're doing every day. So I just started looking at their website. Somebody had to tell me about it. I didn't even know it existed. But they tell you their every operation. So if there's a murder investigation, they'll say something very opaque, like there's a murder investigation in Enfield. Now, Enfield's a huge borough, so I had to figure out, okay, where in Enfield? And I learned that every borough in London has a series of bloggers, people that write about their community, who are have this social radar. They know what's going on. So if I found that there was a murder in Enfield, I would start following certain bloggers and certain tweeters, and I was just within an hour I would figure out where it had happened. Now, I didn't go right away. If it was a murder, say right now, I would wait 2 or 3 days, because if I went right away, it would be the same scene every time. Police, yellow tape, policemen telling me to go back, get away from us. You can't be here. So I always waited 2 or 3 days for the police to leave, and then in 2 or 3 days, the forensic guys would come over, or would still be investigating the scene. They were quite relaxed about things, and then as soon as the yellow tape was gone, members of the family, members of the public could sort of look at the scene and stuff. And in half the pictures I shot, there was nobody. Nobody came to mourn anybody, which is very, like, for example, this woman, this is in Walthamstow, a man beat his girlfriend to death in a car, and then just left her there. And this is the street where it happened, so. But yeah, basically it was like, I went there like 3 days in a row looking for something to see, if it's like a member of the family would lay flowers or something, and nothing, so. So that's how I found out about these, murders and stuff, so. But a lot of them were domestic violence. Like, this is a man who killed his wife because she wanted to divorce him, so he killed her. So obviously, these pictures are not about crime scenes. They're like more like give you a sort of a sense of place where these things happen, So obviously, I never photographed the actual place. Well, if it was outside, I would. But if it was most murders happen indoors, so I would photograph the general area, the building, so get a sense of place where these things happen, So this, for example, this was in Tulse Hill, and it was the only drive-by shooting in London, and when the next day it was all over the Evening Standard, and when you read the Evening Standard, you would think that drive-by shootings happen every day in London, which actually they're a very, very rare occurrence, very rare. This is the only drive-by shooting, and somebody happened to die when it happened, but it was the only drive-by shooting in 2011. But when you read these papers, you think, oh my God! So every time I was photographing anywhere, people would ask me what I was doing. I would tell them what I was doing. People they were very curious to why I was there, because 99% of the time I was the only journalist or whatever at the scene, and people would come up to me and say, oh, isn't London dangerous? Isn't crime getting out of control? And I say, well, actually no. Since 1900, every year crime has dropped in London. So this is, in 2014, for example, was the lowest murder rate in the history of London. People don't realize that in Roman times, and Victorian times, and Tudor times, people used to stab each other all the time. People carried knives, weapons everywhere. So people think that crime is going up. Our awareness of crime is going up because in 1800, if a person got murdered a block away or a mile away, you'd never know about it because there was no media to cover it. Now we're extremely aware of every part of London, but in fact, London's never been safer. So in the last 100 years, 115 years, there's been a drop in crime every year. But we are taught to be afraid of crime. So we're told we need more police, we need more security, we need more security people, blah, 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 Even with terrorism, crime is, if you count all the acts of the RA, it didn't affect the crime rate. It just drops. So London is not, what I'm trying to say is that London is not a dangerous city. One of the things I'm trying to tell you is maybe to look at London in a different way. Maybe like one of the things I do with this project, I call this project like an alternative portrait of London. Because, there's no Big Ben in my pictures, there's no Marble Arch, there's no Westminster Palace, there's no signifiers of London. These are like the kind of places you never look at when you're walking around London. If that's for me, tell them I'm busy. So any questions while I'm here? Showing pictures?
So all in all, how many places have you been visiting, all in all?
I visited 210 places over between 2011 and 2012. I did 2 complete years, and then I stopped. I think 210 was enough, I couldn't have done this project in a complete sense. In most, like Paris had like 350 murders. People never think about Paris, or Madrid has more murders than Barcelona has more murders than London. Most cities in Europe have more murders than London, London is actually a very safe place, 210 murders in a 2-year period is very low, It's just, the city of London is an urban area of 10 million people. And we think, most cities of 10 million people around the world have huge murder rates, compared. I think something like 50 cities in China have a bigger murder rate than London. The top 50 American cities, some of these cities are like only 500,000 people, have a higher murder rate than London, So, keep things in perspective, so. This is one of the few pictures I did inside. There was a fight in a bookies in Streatham, and I was intrigued by the sign that says no hoodies, no cowboys, or midnight ramblers, And for some reason, the forensic guys, I got to know them pretty well. They said, "Oh, you can come in for a second." So I came into this picture, and then I left really quickly before they kicked me out, But it was a few places I photographed where you could actually see where it happened, And there's missing tiles everywhere. If you see at the bottom of the floor, it's because the blood-stained tiles were taken away by the forensic police for more analysis, and so. And this is one of the things I was saying. Random violence is very rare in London. Like this is in Bermondsey as well, and a young Polish student was stabbed to death for his wallet outside of a cash point, and it's like one of the other the 3 or 4 unsolved murders. There's one of them. So when people actually kill somebody for stealing, it's almost hard to place because 99% of murders all around the world are committed by somebody you know. It's very rare anywhere in the world, even in America where there's lots of violence, or in Colombia, or in Venezuela, or South Africa, or all these places you hear about lots of murder. It's very rare to be killed by somebody you don't know. And when that happens, it's almost impossible for the police to start piecing things together. I mean, even with CCTV and everything. So. Now, when the London riots happened in 2011, I'm a photographer, I'm a photojournalist, so I work for The Guardian, I work for the New York Times, I work for most, serious newspapers around the world. In August 2011, when the riots happened, I was commissioned to do a story about communities that have been abandoned by the civil war in Colombia. So I had to spend a month in Colombia for a month. So these pictures were done when I had time to do things between my jobs. So in August 2011, I was in Colombia. And when I was sitting in my hotel room in Colombia, I saw this I turned the TV on and watching CNN, and I'm saying, God, that's Red Bus, that's on fire. I was like, where's that at, It never occurred to me that, and it took me about 5 minutes to realize that I was London. I was in Bogota, and London's on fire. And the first thing I thought, oh my God, my project's gonna be ruined because lots of people are gonna die during these riots, and I'm not gonna be there. And this project that I've been working on for 8 months is completely ruined because I'm not going to be at the most important juncture of this project. Well, in fact, luckily only 3 people died in London, and I say that with a lot of. I don't even want to say luckily. I don't want to say I wish nobody had died, but a few people had died. And actually, it's really weird. Certain pictures you make. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is one of the Croydon. There was a lot of the rioting was in Croydon. And this boy, he wasn't looting. He just got caught up in the whole thing. Got killed by a gang of looters because I think he had witnessed what they were doing, whatever. And they chased him and they killed him. And this is the spot where it happened. So I was there 3 weeks after it happened. And I was amazed the flowers are still fresh. People were putting flowers there every day. And I waited, and then this taxi driver stopped and looked at the flowers. And that was, I know it's not very sharp, but that's basically what's going on, basically, That's what I saw. It was just kind of a quiet moment, And to me, the taxi driver is how most of us see crime. We have a fleeting glimpse of these situations, or maybe read about it or see it on TV, then forget about it. So, in fact, I wouldn't have made this picture if I had been during the riots, So, there's always, you can always make good photographs. There's just different times, different things. So, in a way, I was kind of lucky I wasn't at here anyway. So, if I would have got beaten up and my camera stolen, so it would have no good. So, example, these young girls were mourning a friend of theirs, so I had to go up to them and ask them, can I photograph you? And they said, you can photograph us, but don't show any faces, which is fine because, from the vantage point I was photographing, I couldn't show their faces anyway, so, but, and this is a young boy. He was the youngest victim at the time I was photographing murders, and he was 14 years old, and he was stabbed to death by another 14-year-old. And there was a lot of anger, and when I showed up, because it wasn't too far from where I live, so I said I made a rare exception and decided to go right after it happened. So it would happen at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I was there by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was a huge crowd of people, and there was a lot of anger, and a lot of people were threatening me. And I saw this man. I figured out he was a father, so I went straight up to him and said, I'm sorry to disturb you. I know this is a very hard time for you. I told him my whole project. And he said, yeah, please photograph. So he showed me the picture of his son, so I photographed that. That's what he wanted me to photograph, so that's what I photographed. So, and he was murdered. The young boy was murdered behind the bus stop at a park. So, So it's not technically where it was happened, but I like this picture, and I think it was funny. Like everybody was really angry at me, and then the father said it's okay to photograph, and everybody started being nice to me and stuff. So, but I really do understand people's anger. I mean, I can't imagine somebody come up to me if something horrible happened to me or my family members, and suddenly some photographer showed up. So I'm always very understand. I understand why people don't want to be photographed. It's not a problem for me. So, and this is a murder that happened in Wembley during a football game between England and Wales. And some Welsh supporters got into a fight, and at the bottom of the arch, it's basically two drunk men had a fight and beat each other to death. And by the way, there was about 38 murders of two men, usually white men, beating each other to death over drink. So that's a bigger problem than gangs, but that never gets covered either. So don't drink too much. So. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you feel that in some way you're doing those people who have passed the service by, or doing them some kind of justice by documenting it, having them document with the happening?
I mean, there's so many things I want to say, but one of the things I do want to say is that, these things happen and they're quickly forgotten. So I wanted to create a body of work, at least for 2 years, these things weren't forgotten. My work is archived at the Museum of London. I published a book about it. I've spoken. This is like my 40th talk in the last 2 years about my project. I've talked to community groups, I've talked to people in Enfield, Croydon. So I try to make, remind people of these stories. In my book, there's 80 photographs, and at the back, there's all the little thumbnails of all the photographs I did, and with a little explanation what happened. So, one of my aims of this project was to give a little bit of remembrance, memory, so people, these things weren't completely forgotten, I mean, of course, every one of these murders is a record of it in a police file somewhere or some archive of London, but I wanted to make it a more public, way of doing it. So, yeah, I didn't, and I treated everybody, I never made judgments, nobody deserves to be murdered. I don't care what you do in life, a lot of people, even if you're the worst criminal, you don't deserve to be murdered. I mean, you may deserve to be put in jail, but you don't deserve to be murdered. So I never made judgment. If you look at my book and you read the captions, I don't call people pimps or drug dealers or criminal, lifelong criminals. I just tell you their names and where they were murdered, how old they were, and the circumstances of why it happened, and that's it. I don't make value judgments because a lot of these cases when I was photographing them, people would say, "Oh, that guy deserved to die." And then, of course, 6 months after the court case happened, you realize he didn't deserve to die, or it was a case of mistaken identity. But people would always make these quick judgments about people. So I decided that, I was going to publish a book soon after all these pictures were taken. So I didn't want to make the mistake of calling somebody a murderer, or an axe thief or something, and then find out that he actually was innocent. So, and vice versa for the victim. A lot of people, there's kind of a presumption among all of us that a lot of people who get in these circumstances deserve to die. So we sort of say, well, he probably deserved it. He should have been hanging out with that guy or whatever, So, like for example, this murder, a guy was talking to his girlfriend he had just bought a car and he was showing it off to his girlfriend. They were sitting, probably making out in a really quiet residential street, and two guys came up and said, "Give us a car." And the guy, didn't want to be seen as a weakling in front of his girlfriend, decided to, stand up for himself, and they killed him. And that's it. It just happened in 10 seconds, and that's his family, just they're mourning his death. This is the murder of, I told you about the woman who had killed her mother, and then after 6 years was let out of prison, and then she killed somebody the day after she got let out. This was on November 11th, 2011, which is Remembrance Day, so there was all these flowers there. It was in Bexley Heath. This is just an example. Two guys got into a fight outside of a kebab place. They were drunk. Yeah. And this is an example of a domestic violence. A young girl was killed by her boyfriend. She had just had a baby, and she didn't want to stay with her partner, boyfriend, father of her baby. So he strangled her and dumped her in the canal, in the Grand Union Canal. And she She was from a Sikh family, so, and it just happened to coincide with a Sikh festival that had just ended. So there was all this paraphernalia of, certain Sikhs, certain temples, they celebrate by throwing, replicas of gods and stuff in the water and stuff, and so there was all this strewn of all this paraphernalia from the festival where they found the body. So. And this is a fight that happened in Oxford Street. This was a gang-related on Boxing Day, the busiest day of the year in Oxford Street. Two gangs got into a fight. They accidentally met each other at Foot Locker. These two sets of gangs of teenagers were returning their shoes that their parents had given them, or uncles and stuff. So they were both returning their shoes, and they saw each other, and they had a huge fight. Spilled out into the street in Oxford Street, and somebody got killed. And the street, in 99% of the time, the police close off the street whenever anything happens. But, millions of people are on Oxford Street on Boxing Day, and they could not close the street. And I remember sitting at home relaxing in my pajamas, and suddenly I see this thing I don't know, I heard on the radio or something that there had been a murder on Boxing Day in Oxford Street. So, again, normally I would wait a day or two, but I said, just put my clothes on and abandoned my family and left, and I ran to Oxford Street, and there was this scene of and I was amazed by that nobody stopped. This one guy stopped in this crowd of people, and I was there like 3 hours, and just nobody, people were so busy shopping, Yeah, murder happened, but I gotta get my shoes returned, or I got a receipt, or or something, I gotta do something. I gotta shop, so. Anyway. And this is one of my favorite pictures. It's in Croydon, and even I have prejudices. When I started this project, I thought, I'm going to be going to Tottenham a lot. I'm going to be going to Brixton a lot, Lambeth. In fact, the place I went to the most was Croydon. Now, Croydon used to be a very rich borough, and it still kind of is. And Croydon, the last 20 years, has been the only borough in London to continually build social housing. But it's kind of bit them in the ass because of that. Because what happens is Enfield, all the boroughs in London, they don't build public housing. So when somebody needs to be housed, they send them to Croydon. Everybody's been sent to Croydon. So Croydon now has this huge inequality, huge disparity. And so this is a picture from one of these really, really torn down housing estates called Addiscombe. And this man was, he's a 50-year-old heroin addict. And his drug dealers came to collect their money, and he didn't have the money, so they beat him to death. And he was sitting in that chair where it happened. So, and this is a murder that happened in Hendon in North London, and I actually got told I was going to get killed if I photographed it. And it wasn't actually gang related. It was just a lot of angry people there. So I came back the next day. I said, "Fine, don't worry. You don't want me to photograph. I don't know, no problem with that." So I came back the next day when there was less people, and some of the people, the same people that were there yesterday, were there the same day and the next day, and they were quite fine for me to be there. And I explained to them what I was doing, and they said, "You can photograph and stuff." And and the kid was a young man. His father was also stabbed. This was a bar fight. And his father was stabbed as well. They were watching a football game in a bar. Anyway, that's a lot of football paraphernalia from his friends. But a lot of these places are like this, are just innocuous places. This is a man who had killed his wife, and the red balcony closest to closest to me are the picture. And this is an example of prejudices about things. A transvestite, a woman who had been a transvestite, a woman who had changed I don't even know the right terminology. Basically, she had changed her identity, sexual identity. She was a man living now as a woman for like many years, was found dead. And the police just assumed because of her lifestyle, she's a transvestite, so she must have died of a drug overdose. All her friends campaigned saying, "Please, please, please." And she didn't do drugs. She didn't live a lifestyle. She had a regular job. Please investigate her death. Finally, some forensic policeman had a close look at her body and realized that she'd been murdered. and and a few months after that, they finally caught the guy who did it. So it was domestic violence murder, but because she was, because the victim was a woman whose sexual identity was, a problem to the police, they just didn't investigate it. So anyway, so it wasn't classified as a murder for 6 months. So I didn't go to it right away, because even I believe the police. Well, it's not, somebody just died, so it's not a murder. So 6 months after it happened, I went to photograph this picture, and it just happened that when the day I showed up, the landlord was allowed to rent the flat again, so he'd take all the stuff out. So this is her, her few possessions, her mattress and stuff. So. And this is what the police normally do. After a murder happens, they go around asking people, did you see what happened? Even if they catch the guy right away, they still want witnesses and stuff. So. And this is another interesting story. In 2012, I'm a photographer, I'm an editorial photographer. I was photographing the Olympics in London, and I was really busy. I was working every day, and in the shopping mall, Stratford shopping mall, next to the Olympic site, somebody got murdered. And there were thousands of people there. So between covering, ice hockey, not hockey, but field hockey and, archery, I ran to the shopping mall. And this is during the Olympics. There were tons of tourists, all had cameras. As soon as I showed up, 20 security guards jumped on me and kicked me out. And because they, even though everybody's taking pictures, because I was a journalist, they said, you can't be here. So I had to come, I came back the next day, and I decided to do my Speedy Gonzales accent and said, oh, hey, I carried one little camera with me. And I said, hey, I'm a tourist, because the security guys were sort of suspicious of me. They looked at me like they recognized me. And says, but I acted like I was a tourist from Mexico. And they go, oh, yes, he's fine. So they let me take pictures. But because I was doing, ¿qué pasó? What happened? Murder, oh, it's horrible, oh. So anyway, that's how I managed to take this picture, so. Yeah, so that's, anyway. And people are looking to see what happened. It happened at the basement of the bottom floor, but, so that's the best I could do, because I couldn't carry my tripod and my big camera, so I had to take it with a little camera, so. And here's an example of what does make the news. If a young girl goes missing, and she has to be white, goes missing, it's huge news. And this young woman named Leia, it turned out that her grandmother's boyfriend did it, and hid the body in the basement. The police took them a week to find it. It was in the house where she lived, where they found the body. But during the whole week, when they hadn't found the body, there was this huge media storm, and CNN was there, Fox, not Fox News, but Al Jazeera was there. Al Jazeera, why is Al Jazeera here, It's like, no terrorists are involved, but they were all there, all BBC, everything, And, of course, it was like, oh, young girl, innocent girl gets murdered, Oh, how horrible. She's only 14 years old, and it was horrible. I'm not even excusing that. But I was just very shocked how the media covered it, Because, they made value judgments on the victims. Oh, she didn't deserve to die, so that's going to be big news, So, anyway, it turned out that somebody she knew very well killed her, so. But it's like a homeless man was found murdered at the end of the North Circular on the east side, and nobody didn't make the news. So I'm almost done here. So. But these scenes were the hardest for me. People grieving. And me having to explain myself, and but these pictures are very important to me because I really wanted to show that somebody, yes, it might be a nobody to you, but it was somebody, somebody loved this person who died, and people really, really, truly grieved, and I was always saddened when you go to these places and there was nobody grieving this dead person. This person had been murdered, and so when I did see people grieving, I really wanted to show the humanity that it was real people are involved in all these things, So when I could succeed in getting these kind of pictures, I was very not proud, but I felt like I did my job, And of course, before I even took a single picture, I asked everybody in this picture, can I be here? Can I take your picture? And they all were fine about it, And this is one of the last pictures I did. In the last, as many of you know, since 2005, since a lot of the Eastern European countries that were formally entered in the, became part of the European Union and could travel to England freely, there's lots of European, Eastern European men in London without their partners, without their family ties, without their villages, without anything. The social constraints of every normal person, we don't even think about it. We all have social constraints, we behave ourselves because we have friends, family, whatever. But a lot of young men come to work in London, and they're completely away from their communities, and they just misbehave. And so the third biggest category after domestic violence and mental health was Eastern European men fighting over drink, And this example is these two guys were drinking in a field, and one of them it got out of hand. They had a fight, and one of his friends, and he was a friend, beat him to death and threw him in a little stream, and then left him for dead. So the police had to figure out, who this guy's friends were, because they knew 99% likely that one of his friends had done it. And sure enough, it was one of his friends. So. And this is the last picture, but I wanted to show you this picture because this is in Elephant and Castle. This place, 2 murders happened in the exact same spot, completely unrelated. The flowers on the left-hand side of the picture are from a murder that happened 4 months earlier, which I had photographed as well. And then somebody literally, 1 foot away was murdered as well. And they were both just random murders. It just happened to be in the exact same spot. So it was a second to last murder I photographed, and then I was done with my project. So anyway, that's it. So if you have any questions, here's the time to ask.